Well, John, man, it's a pleasure to connect with you. Thanks for taking time out. It's just incredible, like we were talking about offline. This brand new Anything Mo's project is coming down the pike, and I think you're gonna have some finger snaps, some head nods. I think people are gonna dig this record, man. You did a great job on this, you and Richard Julian. Yeah, yeah,
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg. It's a labor of love,
yeah.
like everything I do, quite frankly.
Mhm.
But we're really excited about this recording, and we're very proud of it.
That's cool. That's cool. Man, I do want you, for folks who may not be familiar, kind of take me back to like your origins. You grew up in Los Angeles, right?
That's right.
Okay, okay, okay. How did music kind of enter the picture? Because you've got this brilliant sound that I think marries 2021 with this timeless blues sensibility. That's at least how I hear it, and it's heartwarming. It's refreshing. But how did things start for you musically, man? What were some of your early influences, and what led you to start playing music?
Oh, wow. Well, man, um, I I found I feel like jazz was somehow in popular music at the time. I mean, it kind of always is. It's always sort of hidden in there, and isn't necessarily overtly out there. And so for me at that time, at a very young age, it was kind of like Ray Charles and the SNL band and things like that. And so I think at that time Ray Charles was doing those Pepsi commercials,
Yeah, yeah.
and and he was also, there was also Georgia on My Mind and the Star Spangled Banner or the national anthem. I mean, America the Beautiful. Pardon me.
Right, right.
And so something about that just really spoke to me, and something about soul music with Aretha Franklin and all of those things. It was out there,
Mhm.
and it really spoke to me for some reason. But I couldn't. We didn't get jazz radio. I didn't know jazz until I was a young teenager.
Okay.
It had always been around, and I would play blues. I'd always play blues because it was Ray Charles, and it was these soul influences that everyone knows.
That's awesome.
And so blues, yes. Jazz, not until later. And you know I remember where we lived, we didn't get jazz radio. The wattage wasn't there. It was just, which is, I think, a common thing.
Yep.
And so I remember going, my mother and I would go to her friend's house, and they had jazz radio crystal clear. And I would have a box of cassette tapes, and blank cassette tapes. And I would go and I would record jazz radio. And so that's how, I really wanted it. And also I would go to the store looking for it. I'd go to the jazz section and try and find records. I didn't know who anybody was, though. So I'd look for records with maybe a piano on the cover, or maybe a Grammy sticker, or
Uh-huh.
something like that. I was really looking for it. I really wanted it. So, I mean, that's how I found jazz.
That's real. That's real. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I guess in making that transition, having that blues background as a pianist to some more, I guess, advanced harmonies. When you heard these recordings, did it kind of spark you to try some things on your own, or
Oh
did you?
God. I remember hearing bebop. I don't remember who it was,
Uh-huh.
but it was fast,
Mhm.
and it was incredible to me. And so in my mind, I'm a kid at this
Uh-huh.
point. And I'm like, oh, jazz, right? And they're just playing really fast. And I'd put my hand on the keyboard. I just move my finger as fast as I can and see if it sounded good. Of course, it sounded terrible. And I was like, what? How come? How do they do that? Why does that sound different? What is it? And I couldn't comprehend. I couldn't believe that jazz musicians could play so fast
Mhm.
and be conscious of every note that they were playing. It was like, to me, impossible. It was too fast, too much. And when I had discovered that you know, jazz musicians are very aware and very conscious of every note that they play, even though it is blazingly fast.
Yeah.
I was stunned. I was blown away.
Uh,
And suddenly jazz music at that time for me became this ultimate music in a sense that you know, because I'd been learning things by ear, trying to learn things by ear and putting things together. And jazz music was so sophisticated and so kind of athletic and virtuosic.
right.
It was like, oh, this is the ultimate music. This is the ultimate music for a musician to try and achieve. That's what occurred to me. And that was a big part of, you know, why I pursued it, was this curiosity and sort of wanting to become, you know, one of these superhero musicians.
Sure.
That was my perception at the time.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And I know for me, it engendered a sense of community. You know, I was able to kind of get, you know, outside of, you know, different little pockets I was socialized in and meet new people. And the common ground was this music, you know. We're kind of the same generation. So it's like, you know, clubs, you know, when I was, you know, 19 and 20, you know, there weren't a lot of people my age where I was really hanging out like that. But at college, that's where I found this little subset of friends, and we would, you know, borrow each other's albums and,
Right.
you know, go in each other's garages and try to work stuff out, that kind of thing.
Mm.
How was it for you? Did you find that same thing when you went to school? Who were some folks early on that you kind of had peer associations with, where you kind of, you know, cross developed each other and taught each other?
Well, you know, I started at the university at a relatively early age. I was a freshman at Cal State Los Angeles when I was 14,
Wow.
and
Wow.
and so that was my opportunity, because where we lived,
Mm-hmm.
there was no jazz. There was no. It wasn't accessible. The education component of it, you know, and I didn't know what records to buy. Right, like I said, there was no internet. You know, I couldn't get to it. But here I was at this university that had a jazz program. And so I'll never forget my first day auditioning for the combos. Now, it wasn't a big program. It was a handful of people that were majors there.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I remember going in and playing a blues, and I knew how to play blues.
Uh-huh.
And then another, like a tune with changes, was put in front of me, and I completely folded. I just completely just dive bombed, and I was mortified.
Mm-hmm.
And I, of course, I practiced like crazy, and I was examining this tune, trying to figure it out. And that was sort of my initiation into jazz education.
Okay.
Now, you know, my teachers were extremely important to me. They were sort of the ones that had the information that I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about the jazz scene, so I wasn't really a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since the program was so small, the camaraderie was just sort of automatic. You know, you couldn't get lost in the mix, not there anyway. And so we would talk about recordings, and I don't know if anyone I can think of at that time really became is still someone that I know professionally.
Okay.
But it was an extremely important time for me to get into people like Herbie Hancock and Oscar Peterson and John Coltrane, Miles Davis. I mean, like all of the, you know, the sort of top legendary, you know, kind of people. And at that time, that was, I was just dipping my toes into it and trying to get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
cool.
Important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But as you kept going, you must have caught the bug. Hey man, you know, I've got to get to New York, because that's where the cutting edge cats are. That's where I feel I belong. That's the water level that I want to seek in my creative pursuits. You know, Some people's New York progression is easy. Some people, it's like, like a friend of mine says, pushing a van up a hill and people are pelting rocks at you. And somewhere in the middle of that for others. Like, how was the New York transition for you?
Oh, the New York transition. The New York transit. Well, I got to New York. I got to New Jersey. Mm-hmm. That's where I got to first.
Sure.
And the reason being was because Kenny Barron was teaching at Rutgers University at the time. And I remember finding that out. I was like, I need to study with Kenny. I need to study with Kenny, mm-hmm. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made, unquestionably.
Wow.
So I applied and I got in and there I was. And that was my ticket really for getting to, the tri-state area, to New York, essentially.
Yeah.
As far as being in New York, when I actually finally moved to New York, I moved to Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Man, that is an initiation that lasts a long, long time. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that. And you have roommates and you eat really cheaply and you try and get onto the scene. Mm-hmm. And I think that it takes a while. It took me a while anyway, mm-hmm. To sort of get into the lifestyle and the flow of it. And I was in my early 20s at the time. So I had a lot of sort of self-improvement, self-progression that had to happen at that time as well, which is something huge to contend with on its own, much less trying to make your way in the city at that time. So, but it was definitely worth it. I mean, obviously it was worth it. I've made it this far. I'm still in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And proud and happy to be here. But I learned a lot of lessons, and I think important lessons, not only in life, but especially in learning this music. Mm-hmm. I had to get to New York, not only because, Kenny Barron was here, but I knew I had to be in that environment. I couldn't just be, I just felt like the scene was here. I remember the first time I came to New York and I went to Augie's.
Yes.
And I went to Smalls, mm-hmm. and I went to the Vanguard. And I remember 18 years old, this is before I moved to New York, and hearing young jazz musicians, only slightly older than myself, maybe just a generation ahead. And it's sounding so authentic and just the attention to detail and the reverence for the history of the music and just really doing it. I didn't think it was possible. I thought it was like a music that just existed in the past. And I thought it was, I'd never heard it live sounding like that, to sound so authentic. I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And when I came here and I saw young people sounding like the real thing, I was like, I have to go to New York. It's here. It's here.
Yeah.
And that was the thing about it.
Indeed.
Huh.
Man. Yeah, I hear you. There's one, I want to fast forward a little bit, and we've talked about this offline too. But where I really got the revelation of you and the totality of what you bring to musical situations was in this really special quintet project that you had that played Monday nights at Smalls. A lot of times, Tavon Pennicott and Stacey Dillard, were your front line. Low Leathers was your drummer, and Spencer Murphy, the bassist. But tell me about that unique partnership, because sometimes when I hear ensembles, it's like, man, that's a really nice situation. Other times it's like, hey, man, these guys are almost tailor-made to play with each other in this situation. And that's the vibe that I got from it. Tell me about what it was like working with those guys and how that scene developed, if you can.
I mean, Spencer had been doing Monday nights at Smalls, and Monday nights at Smalls at that time was less touristy than, say, a Friday, Saturday, for obvious reasons. And so, generally speaking, the people that were at the club on a late Monday night were musicians mostly. And so I remember Spencer asking me to do the gig, and there were different iterations when we first started, but it really solidified into that group that you mentioned. And the thing was that it just came naturally. These were all guys, we were all guys that were sort of part of the scene, very much so at Smalls. And Monday nights was sort of, we would try and get that room silent. We and it's no easy task on a Monday night when you got a bunch of musicians hanging out, drinking and meeting new people. And so that was, I remember it kind of being our challenge in really trying to get their attention. And so there's just a natural instinct that everybody in that band had at that time to be able to be captivating and interesting. And, there were no rehearsals. Wow. It was our show was Monday nights, scheduled at 1 a.m., probably 2 a.m. was when we started. And we would just work it out. It was a workshop every week. And it was just, we would just add things and just really develop a repertoire, a relatively small repertoire, actually. Not unlike, and what I think of is when Miles Davis was, on the road, with Herbie and Wayne and that repertoire not being super wide, not the live repertoire anyway. And so we had our group of tunes that we really tried to develop, and I knew early on that it was something special. And so I was like, we have to record something. We have to document this. And so we did. And that is one of the greatest things I've ever been a part of, that recording, just a documentation of flow and instinct. And there are solo improvisations, free group improvisations that I can't believe happened. Just astonishing, the level of telepathy. And it's really a special thing, and a special thing at the club as well. So I'm very proud of that recording.
Yeah. No, it's a keeper, man. It's one that I return to often as well. And now there's a new thing on the horizon. You were talking about earlier, no rehearsals, anything goes. Well, we flipped that a little bit, or you have with Richard Julian, anything mows.
Yes.
And man, I love this thing, man. Tell me, of course, a little bit about meeting Richard and kind of deciding to work, this project, because, when you think about the pantheon of male jazz singers, Joe Williams comes to my mind, Eddie Jefferson does too, but also Mose Allison. And I don't know that Mose has been tributed or his repertoire examined as deeply as some of the other examples. Talk about the project, if you will, and the impetus for getting it going with Richard Julian.
Well, I'm a fan of Richard's. Richard's, he's a singer-songwriter, and he writes great songs, and he's a great performer. And he would have a residency at the Old Living Room on the Lower East Side, and his drummer was my drummer, right on. Dan Reeser. And Dan is super versatile, extremely musical drummer, and I would go to his gig, Richard's gig, and Richard would come to my gig, and we just had this sort of mutual respect when we first met each other. And so in my mind, I was like, I would love to, work with him, to do something with him. And I don't remember the order of events. I mean, I'd been a Mose Allison fan, since being a young teenager, and getting that music and, listening to it on jazz radio. And so I remember talking to Richard about it over the phone, because we had just, we'd become more and more friendly. And I was like, it just somehow struck me. Why don't we try it? And I didn't know if Richard was into Mose. I didn't even know if he knew him necessarily. I was just a shot in the dark. And so and it turns out that Mose is his guy, actually. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I asked him if he wanted to do a show and and start a thing. And it was casual. It was like, yeah, I got to, we'll do a gig at Smalls. Maybe we'll do a gig somewhere, it was just a bar band, just something fun that we could do, and just a chance for us to do something together. Cause I loved what he did so much. And so he knew all the tunes. And I was like, man, this is amazing. This is incredible. And he sounded great. And if you listen to the record, he's just, I feel like he is on point. On all of it. And so we played that first show at Smalls Jazz Club, and then we ended up doing a few more shows over the years, and it just developed, and then it was kind of the same thing. I was like, man, we should make a record.
Yeah.
We should just make this record just for kicks. And see what happens, and I bet people will like it. And I feel like with Mose is an interesting guy, and I think the perception of Mose, I've found personally that not necessarily a lot of jazz musicians, I should say, know who Mose is. They're not familiar with the work, and I find that more sort of classic rock and roll people know who Mose is more than jazz people do. And I was like, wow, this is like, Mose has this ability to cross over. Cause Mose, his first records, he was on Prestige the same time John Koopman was on Prestige. Right. So it's not like, he's sort of this, obscure, ultra obscure guy. But he had this appeal to both sides of it. Cause his lyrics are, your mind is on vacation and your mouth is working overtime. I mean, are you kidding me? Who comes up with something like that, and it's a blues and just go on, it's so perfect. Yep. And so it's charming and humorous and just witty. And also his other songs are so appropriate for the times. They're timeless songs, during any political time. And especially, during this last president we had, and how hyper political everyone seemed to get. The Mose stuff was just, wow. It's as if he was in a time machine and was writing about the times, now. So I feel like, I think that the record can be even a reflection of those sort of tumultuous times that we had been through and continue to go through, quite frankly. While playing the blues, while having some wit and humor about it, and maybe not even necessarily taking yourself so seriously, but playing the blues and playing jazz. And I don't know, I love this project. I mean, I once again, but Richard really brings it together, and the band sounds great, and I just hope people check it out. I think it'll just be fun.
Sure thing, man. You sound great on it, and I'm not just saying this because you're here.
Thank you.
It's a good feeling. It's a good vibe, and it's a unique challenge, I guess, on one hand, to kind of blend Mose's sensibility vocally and pianistically over the course of two different people. He's this one guy with this one conception, but you guys made that pocket feel right at home, and I think folks are really going to enjoy this album. And I got to ask you, as a person who is involved in this community, do you think, and it's hard to foreshadow anything in these days and times, but do you think that this project could have that I won't say crossover, but appeal wider than just to a traditional jazz audience? How do you kind of structure it when you think about the audience output?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I remember we played a show at Dizzy's Club at Lincoln Center, and I didn't know who was going to show up to that gig. I didn't know, because we were going to do this Mose Allison thing, and sadly we lost Mose a few years ago. Not many people anyway are really doing Mose. And like I said, I found more rock and roll people sort of appreciated Mose. I just found that was the case. And so I remember being on the microphone during that show, and we sold out those shows to my astonishment, to my astonishment. And I asked the audience, who here is for Mose? Like, who came out here because they know Mose and they wanted to hear this music? And the crowd erupted. And I was like, wow, the spirit of Mose and the legacy of his music just lives on. And we're sort of trying to carry that torch and keep it going. I think, and that's the thing, is that, the music is not so unrelatable. I feel like it's very relatable. Mm-hmm. The lyrics, if anything, are the thing that are going to really touch people. I mean, it's a thing that touched me. So for myself, that's like, it's a no-brainer. You hear those lyrics and you're going to relate to them. Mm-hmm. And blues, Mose is a blues musician, very much so. And so people, and the blues, I think, touches people. It connects people. It makes you feel something viscerally, automatically, once you start playing it. And so Mose, sort of like with these lyrics and the blues, and sort of mixing them together, as charming as he is, I really think a lot of people are going to like it. I really do. They just have to hear it. I just want them to hear it, And if not us, just let's go to the real thing, listen to Mose. It's so good. It's so good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll back up just a bit as you were talking about Mose and his lyrics and how applicable they can be to the present day, all we've been through and all we continue to go through. And I remember back in March on your social media, being really moved by almost a soliloquy that you had written, speaking about your experience as an Asian American jazz musician, what that means and the pride that you have for that. And you went on to say, basically, your experience has not been necessarily one of hatred, but of one of indifference. And I think to draw that line and to step out that way, will get a lot of people's attention. And I think that our conscience needs to be pricked in this hour. It's not always the overt hate thing. It's just not acknowledging, not knowing.
Right.
What are some ways as artists, as creatives, that we can help to promote this awareness in our community, again, so that we're not asleep, that we're not dormant, that we're actually trying to engage people, trying to put forward a brilliance that has to be reckoned with in this society?
There is a legacy of inclusion when it comes to jazz. Mm-hmm. It has been in the music where racial barriers have been overcome very early on in this music. Musicians have always been onto this. Their values are not necessarily based on race. When I encounter racism, it's not a musician. It's always someone else. Musicians' values have to do with how you play, how you sound. And beyond that, maybe just the camaraderie, just getting along. And so with that, I think that musicians tend to, jazz musicians are always listening. That's sort of in the skill set of how you learn this music to begin with. And I think there's something to that. I think that to overcome it, you want to listen. You want to listen and open your ears and try and hear things for what they are, as opposed to what they look like, or even and embrace it. Because as jazz musicians, you know, you have to embrace things, you know, to try and get inside of a culture or a music, and you're trying to emulate and understand and this thing, and it takes work. It takes dedication. You have to be thoughtful.
That's right.
And so if you're thoughtful and you are intentional with it and compassionate about it, then there, I think, will be understanding or tolerance if you know, if it has to go there. And I think that that's the thing with, you know, with the Asian community, the indifference component of it, I think, has a lot to do with maybe, you know, it could be simply about population. There are not as many Asian people, I guess, in this country as other minority groups. And I think that we've been able to maneuver our way through this indifference, you know, and being called the so-called model minority, and being able to be a part of American culture in this way, where I felt like maybe people weren't really paying attention. But obviously, Asian people have as much of an artistic voice as anybody, you know, not because they're Asian, but because they're humans, and because they're just artists. And so when I put that out there, I really wanted people just to take note of it and not to write someone off simply because of their race, and not, you know, and really listen to their music and try and get into that, and not objectifying, you know, necessarily, but really listening and understanding. And that's really where I came from with all of that.
I love it, man. I'm going to get you to hang on the line, but man, it's been a real privilege to have you on this show, John. Thank you so much, man.
Greg, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Right on.